Get off the bus, please, the driver said. I stayed and found out love again. But not the love I thought I knew. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 78 years old. I live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, where the radiator clanks through winter nights and summer heat seeps through thin walls. Every morning, I wake to the symphony of New York awakening around me. Garbage trucks rumble past my window at 5:30. The subway screeches 2 blocks away. Neighbors argue in languages I don't understand. But pain sounds the same in any tongue. For years, this routine was my prison. I'd shuffle to the kitchenette in my faded pink slippers, the ones my daughter bought me 3 Christmases ago when she still pretended to care. I'd make instant coffee because real coffee was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Not after sending my son another $1,000 last month. Not after paying my daughter's credit card bill the month before. The apartment walls are covered with photographs. Yellow-edged memories of better times. My late husband Robert smiling beside our Christmas tree in 1985. My children's high school graduations. Family dinners around our old dining table. Back when we had a house in Flushing. Back when we were a family. But photographs lie, don't they? They capture smiles, not the silence that followed. They freeze moments, not the decades of disappointment that came after. That Tuesday in March started like any other. Cold rain pelted my window as I dressed in my best coat, the navy blue one I'd owned for 15 years. I was heading to the senior center on Northern Boulevard, not because I enjoyed it particularly, but because it was somewhere to go. Somewhere with warmth and voices, even if those voices belonged to strangers. I caught the Q103 bus at the corner of 31st Avenue. The same route I'd taken dozens of times before. I had my Metro card, my purse clutched tight, and a book of crossword puzzles to keep my mind busy. The bus was crowded with morning commuters, their faces buried in phones, their worlds contained in tiny screens. I found a seat near the middle, settling in for the 20-minute ride. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message from my son Michael. Mom, need rent money. Landlord threatening eviction. Can you send $1,500 by tonight? My stomach dropped. $1,500. Half my monthly Social Security check. I stared at the message, reading it again and again. No, please. No, thank you for everything you've done. Just a demand wrapped in desperation. I was still staring at my phone when the bus lurched to a stop. Not at my usual stop, but somewhere in the middle of Queens Boulevard. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, turned in his seat. Lady in the blue coat, he called out. Get off the bus, please. I looked around, confused. Other passengers were staring now. A teenage girl with purple hair smirked. An elderly man shook his head and looked away. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible over the engine's rumble. You heard me. Off the bus. But I paid my fare. I have my Metro card. You've been on this bus for 40 minutes going back and forth. This isn't a hotel. Get off. 40 minutes? I looked at my phone. Somehow, lost in that text message from Michael, lost in the familiar pain of being needed only for money, I'd missed my stop. Missed it by miles. Please, I just need to get to... Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Every face on that bus was turned toward me now, some pitying, others annoyed. I was the crazy old lady holding up their day, the burden they had to endure. I should have stood up, should have gathered my purse and my dignity and walked off that bus with my head held high. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was Michael's text. Maybe it was the years of being dismissed, overlooked, treated like an inconvenience by the very people who were supposed to love me. No, I whispered. Excuse me? I said no, louder this time. I paid my fare. I'm not causing trouble. I'm just an old woman trying to get somewhere. And you're treating me like garbage. The bus fell silent. Even the engine seemed to quiet, as if the universe was holding its breath. The driver's face reddened. Lady, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder for who? I asked. I've spent my entire life making things easier for everyone else. My children, my husband when he was alive, strangers on the street. When do things get easier for me? I wasn't just talking to the bus driver anymore. I was talking to Michael, who saw me as an ATM, to my daughter Sarah, who called only when she needed something, to my granddaughters who rolled their eyes when I tried to hug them, to the world that had decided my worth expired on my 65th birthday. The purple-haired teenager was recording me now with her phone. Great, I'd probably end up on social media as the crazy bus lady, but I didn't care anymore. You know what? I said, settling back in my seat. I think I'll stay right here. And that's when everything changed. The driver called his supervisor. Other passengers got off at the next stop, shooting me dirty looks as they departed. New passengers got on, creating a strange audience for the standoff between a 78-year-old woman and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the years I'd spent apologizing for taking up space, for asking for help, for expecting love without having to buy it. I was thinking about Sarah, my 45-year-old daughter who lived in a luxury apartment in Manhattan but couldn't find time to visit her mother. Sarah, who'd inherited her father's sharp tongue and his ability to make me feel small with just a look. Just last month, she'd called me crying about her divorce proceedings. "Mom, I need to borrow some money for legal fees," she'd said. "Just $20,000. I'll pay you back as soon as the settlement comes through." $20,000. Nearly half of what I had left from selling the house after Robert died. But I couldn't say no to my daughter's tears, could I? I couldn't be the kind of mother who turns her back on her child's pain. So I emptied my savings account. Again. "You're such an angel, Mom," Sarah had said, her voice sweet as honey. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But when was the last time she'd asked how I was doing? When had she last visited without needing something? I couldn't remember. Then there was Michael, my baby boy who'd turned 50 last year but still called me when his life fell apart. Michael, who'd been through 3 failed businesses, 2 divorces, and countless jobs that never seemed to work out. Every crisis was an emergency. Every setback was somebody else's fault. "The contractor ripped me off," he'd tell me. "My ex-wife is bleeding me dry." My boss had it out for me from day one. Never his fault, never his responsibility. Just another problem for Mom to solve with her checkbook. I'd spent decades being their safety net, their emotional dumping ground, their last resort when the world got too difficult. And what did I have to show for it? An empty bank account and an even emptier heart. The supervisor arrived 30 minutes later. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a patient voice. She sat down beside me, and for the first time in months, someone spoke to me with genuine respect. "Ma'am, I'm sorry this happened," she said. "Sometimes our drivers get overwhelmed. Can you tell me what's going on?" So I did. I told her about missing my stop because my son's text message had sent me spiraling into familiar despair. About the years of being treated like I was invisible by everyone except when they needed money. About feeling lost in a city I'd called home for 55 years. "Where were you trying to go?" she asked. "The senior center on Northern Boulevard. I go there sometimes just to be around people. Would you like me to give you a ride there?" I almost said yes. Almost fell back into the pattern of accepting kindness from strangers while my own family treated me like a burden. But something stopped me. "Actually," I said, "I think I'd like to go home." The ride back to Astoria gave me time to think. Really think. For the first time in years. When had I become so afraid of disappointing people that I'd forgotten to protect myself? When had I started measuring my worth by how much I could give away? My apartment felt different when I walked through the door that afternoon. Smaller somehow. Sadder. The photographs on the walls looked like evidence of a life I'd only imagined living. Those smiles, those embraces. Had any of it been real? Or had I been performing love while my family took notes on my weaknesses? I made myself a cup of real coffee. The expensive kind I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. I sat at my small kitchen table and looked at Michael's text message again. $1,500. For rent, he probably hadn't paid because he'd spent the money on something else. Some new get-rich-quick scheme or expensive dinner or toy he'd convinced himself he deserved. For the first time in my adult life, I typed a response I'd never sent before. No, just that. 1 word. 2 letters. The most powerful sentence I'd written in decades. My phone rang within minutes. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. On the 4th call, I answered. "Mom, what do you mean no? I'm about to be homeless. Then maybe you should call your sister. Or get a second job. Or figure it out like every other adult in the world." Silence. Long, stunned silence. "Mom, are you feeling okay? This doesn't sound like you." Maybe that's the problem, Michael. Maybe I've spent so many years being the person you needed me to be that I forgot who I actually am. But what about what I need? The words came out louder than I intended. What about the fact that I'm 78 years old and living on $800 a month after I pay my rent? What about the fact that I haven't been to a doctor in 2 years because I sent my medical fund to you and your sister? "Mom, you're being dramatic. We can work something out. Maybe I can pay you back in installments." "With what money, Michael? You can't even pay your rent." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Something that felt almost like strength. Within an hour, Sarah called. She'd been crying. She was always crying when she wanted something. Mom, Michael told me about your conversation. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you at all. That's what he said too. Tell me, Sarah, when was the last time either of you called just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed money or advice or someone to fix your problems, just to check on your mother? Another long pause. I could hear her breathing, thinking, probably trying to remember a single instance that would prove me wrong. We've all been so busy, Mom. You know how it is. No, I don't know how it is. I've never been too busy for either of you. Not once in 50 years. That's not fair. We love you. Love. Such a small word for such a complex feeling. Did they love me, or did they love what I could do for them? Did they miss me when I wasn't around, or just the services I provided? If you love me, I said quietly, prove it. Come see me. Not when you need something. Just come see me because I'm your mother and I'm lonely. Mom, I can't just drop everything. Then don't. But don't call it love either. I hung up on her too. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of guilt or worry, but because of something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The possibility that I could say no. The possibility that I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into other people's convenience. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to remember who I used to be before I became everyone else's solution. I got up and made another cup of real coffee. In the kitchen, under the harsh fluorescent light, I really looked at those photographs for the first time in years. Robert's funeral, where my children had spent more time on their phones than comforting me. Sarah's second wedding, where she'd been too busy with photographers to introduce me to her new in-laws. Michael's business launch parties, where I'd written checks and stood in corners, watching him network with people whose names he'd forgotten by morning. I was invisible in my own family's story. The woman behind the camera, never in the frame. The one who made things possible but never got to enjoy them. At 78 years old, I was having the realization that should have come decades earlier. I had spent my entire adult life auditioning for love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth the part. But here's what I didn't expect. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. Not my children, coming to apologize or manipulate me back into compliance. It was my neighbor from across the hall, Mrs. Carmen Alvarez. Carmen was 72, originally from the Dominican Republic. With silver hair she wore in an elegant bun and eyes that sparkled with mischief. We'd nodded politely in the hallway for 3 years, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, and complained about the building's ancient heating system. But we'd never really talked. Eleanor, she said, holding a small covered dish. I made too much sancocho last night. Would you like some? The smell wafting from under the aluminum foil made my mouth water. When was the last time someone had cooked for me? When was the last time someone had thought of me at all? That's very kind, but you don't have to. Mija, she said, using the Spanish term of endearment that made my heart skip. We're neighbors. Neighbors take care of each other. I invited her in for coffee. Real coffee, the expensive kind. We sat at my little table, sharing her soup and talking about everything except children and grandchildren, and the people who were supposed to love us, but somehow forgot how. Carmen told me about her garden on the fire escape, where she grew herbs and small tomatoes that tasted like summer. I told her about my crossword puzzles and the books I'd been meaning to read, but never had time for because someone always needed something. You know, Carmen said after her second cup of coffee, I've been thinking about taking a painting class at the community center on Steinway Street, but I'm nervous about going alone. Would you be interested? A painting class? When was the last time I'd done something just because it sounded fun? When was the last time I'd tried something new? Something that had nothing to do with solving someone else's problems? I don't know if I'd be any good at it, I said. Carmen laughed, a rich sound that filled my small kitchen with warmth. Who cares if we're good at it? We're 70-something years old. We've earned the right to be terrible at new things. I signed up for the painting class that afternoon. Watercolors on Wednesday evenings, taught by a patient woman named Linda who believed everyone had an artist inside them waiting to come out. My first painting was supposed to be a bowl of fruit, but it looked more like colorful blobs on wet paper. Carmen's wasn't much better. We laughed until our cheeks hurt. For the first time in months, I went to bed happy instead of worried. I didn't check my phone for messages from my children. I didn't lie awake calculating how much money I had left and how long it would last if I kept saying yes to every crisis. I just slept, deep and dreamless. But family patterns don't break easily. The next week, Sarah showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had flowers, my favorite chocolates, and the kind of smile she used to wear as a child when she'd broken something and hoped I wouldn't notice. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, she said, settling onto my couch without being invited. You're right. I haven't been a good daughter lately. I've been selfish. The words I'd wanted to hear for years. The acknowledgement I'd craved. But now they felt hollow, like lines from a script she'd rehearsed on the subway ride from Manhattan. "I want to make it up to you," she continued. "Why don't we go shopping this weekend? My treat. We could get lunch at that place you like in Flushing. My treat." With whose money? I wondered. With the $20,000 I'd lent her for legal fees she probably didn't need? With the inheritance from her father that she'd already decided would be hers someday? "That's thoughtful, Sarah, but I have plans this weekend." Plans? She couldn't hide her surprise. In her mind, I didn't have plans. I had availability, waiting to be filled by her convenience. "I'm taking a painting class, and Carmen and I are going to the botanical garden on Saturday." "Carmen?" "My neighbor. We're becoming friends." Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a calculation I'd seen before but never understood until now. She was reassessing the situation, trying to figure out what this new development meant for her access to my resources. "That's nice, Mom, but don't you think you should be careful about getting too close to people you don't really know? Some people take advantage of older folks." The irony was so thick I could taste it. My own daughter, who'd borrowed over $60,000 from me in the past 3 years, was warning me about people who might take advantage of my generosity. "Like you have?" I asked quietly. Her face flushed red. "That's not fair. I'm your daughter. Everything I've borrowed was for legitimate emergencies." "Was your BMW payment an emergency, Sarah? Was the $5,000 for your vacation to Italy last summer an emergency? I needed that break. The divorce was so stressful. And what about my stress? What about the fact that I've been eating generic cereal for dinner because I gave you my grocery money? Mom, you're being ridiculous. If you needed money, you should have said something." "When? When would I have said something? You call me when you need money, and you hang up as soon as you get it. When was I supposed to squeeze in my own problems?" Sarah's mask slipped completely then. The sweet, apologetic daughter disappeared, replaced by the woman I'd raised but somehow failed to know. "Fine," she said, standing up. "Fine. If that's how you want to be, then we don't have anything to discuss. Actually, we do. I want you to start paying me back. $50 a month, starting now. It's not much, but it's something." "Are you serious?" "Mom, I'm going through a divorce. I can't afford." "Then start with 25. Or 10. I don't care how much, but I want something. Some acknowledgement that the money I gave you wasn't free." She stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. In her world, mothers gave freely and asked for nothing in return. Properties of mothers. Unconditional love, unlimited resources, infinite patience, no needs of their own. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "I can't believe you're choosing strangers over your own family." "I'm not choosing strangers over family, Sarah. I'm choosing people who treat me with respect over people who don't." She left without saying goodbye. I watched her from my window as she got into her BMW, the one I'd helped finance, and drove away into the Manhattan traffic that had swallowed her years ago. Michael's response was different but equally predictable. He didn't come to see me. Instead, he sent a series of increasingly desperate text messages over the following weeks. "Mom, I know you're mad, but this is serious. I really am going to be evicted. I found a job, but it doesn't start for 2 weeks. I just need enough to hold me over. Why are you ignoring me? I'm your son." And then, finally, the message that showed me exactly who he thought I was. "I hope you're happy. I'm sleeping in my car because my mother decided to abandon me." Abandon. As if saying no to one request erased 50 years of yes. As if setting one boundary meant I'd stopped being his mother. As if love was something I owed him rather than something we shared. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I went to my painting class and mixed colors on my palette until they became something beautiful. I had tea with Carmen and learned about her childhood in Santiago, where she dreamed of becoming a teacher before life led her to New York and marriage and raising children who loved her from a distance. "My daughter calls every Sunday," Carmen told me as we walked through Flushing Meadows Park one afternoon, "but she calls to check a box, like a chore she has to complete. Talk to Mom, check. Now I can go back to my real life." I understood completely. The performative love that looked like caring but felt like obligation. The way our children had learned to manage us rather than know us. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd said no more often," I told her. "If I'd taught them to want my company instead of just my help." "It's not too late," Carmen said. "We're not dead yet, Eleanor. We still get to decide how the story ends." 2 months into my rebellion, as I'd started thinking of it, something unexpected happened. Sarah called, but not for money. She called because she was worried. "Mom, Michael told me you're not returning his calls. He says you told him to figure things out on his own." "That's right. But what if he really is homeless? What if something happens to him?" For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of maternal guilt. The voice that had controlled my decisions for 50 years. What if? What if they really need you? What if saying no makes you a bad mother? What if love means never setting limits? But then I thought about Carmen, who'd raised 3 children and somehow managed to keep both their love and her dignity intact. I thought about my painting teacher, Linda, who talked about boundaries like they were gifts we gave ourselves. I thought about the woman I used to be before I became everyone else's solution. Sarah, I said. Michael is 50 years old. He's survived this long without me solving every problem. If he's really homeless, there are shelters. There are social services. There are family members who aren't me. But you're his mother. Yes, I'm his mother. Not his personal bank. Not his emergency fund. Not his backup plan when adult life gets difficult. I'm his mother, which means I love him enough to let him learn how to take care of himself. I don't understand you anymore, Sarah said. This isn't the mother who raised us. She was right. The mother who raised them never said no, never asked for anything, never demanded respect or consideration or basic human courtesy. That mother had been so afraid of losing their love that she'd forgotten to require it in the first place. Maybe, I said. That mother made some mistakes. The conversation ended badly, as they all did now. But I was beginning to understand that badly and wrongly weren't the same thing. Sometimes the right thing feels wrong because we've been doing the wrong thing for so long. Spring turned into summer, and I started to notice changes in myself that had nothing to do with my children. I was sleeping better. My chronic headaches disappeared. I was reading books again. Real books with complex characters and beautiful language. Not just crossword puzzle magazines to pass the time. Carmen and I joined a senior hiking group that met every Saturday. We weren't exactly hiking the Appalachian Trail, but we walked through Central Park and along the East River, moving our bodies and feeding our souls with fresh air and new faces. I bought new clothes. Not expensive ones, but clothes that fit properly and made me feel like a person rather than a placeholder. A bright yellow sundress that Carmen said made me look like sunshine. A pair of comfortable walking shoes that didn't pinch my feet. A lipstick in a shade called Berry Brave that made me smile every time I caught my reflection. My apartment changed too. I took down some of the old family photos and replaced them with pictures from my new life. Carmen and me at the botanical garden, grinning like teenagers. My painting class group showing off our latest masterpieces. A sunset from Coney Island, where Carmen had taken me for my first trip to the beach in 5 years. The old photos went into a box, but not out of bitterness. I wasn't erasing the past, just making room for the present. Those memories were part of my story, but they weren't the whole story. And they certainly weren't the ending. In August, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was my granddaughter Jessica, Sarah's 17-year-old daughter. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. Grandma Eleanor? It's Jess. Is this a bad time? My heart jumped. Of all my family members, Jessica was the one whose absence hurt the most. She'd been my little shadow when she was small, always asking questions, always wanting to help with cooking or crafts or trip planning. But somewhere around her 13th birthday, she'd become too cool for grandmothers, too busy for visits, too important for phone calls. It's never a bad time for you, sweetheart. How are you? I'm okay. Mom told me you guys had some kind of fight. She said you've been acting weird lately. Acting weird. Also known as acting like my own, needs mattered. Also known as refusing to be an ATM with feeling. Your mom and I had a disagreement about boundaries, I said carefully. Nothing that can't be worked out if everyone's willing to try. She said you won't give Mike any more money, and that you've been hanging out with strangers instead of family. I could hear Sarah's words in Jessica's voice, the way children unconsciously echo their parents' perspectives even when they're trying to form their own. Jessica, can I ask you something? When was the last time your mom visited me just to spend time together? Not because she needed help with something, just to see her mother? A long pause. I don't know. I mean, she's really busy with the divorce and work and everything. I understand that she's busy. Everyone's busy. But I've been her mother for 45 years. Don't you think I deserve a little of her time that doesn't come with a request for money or favors? Another pause. Longer this time. When Jessica spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. I guess I never thought about it like that. And what about you, sweetie? I know you're 17 and have your own life. I don't expect you to call every day or spend your weekends with your boring old grandmother. But it might be nice to hear from you once in a while when you don't need me to send money for school trips or electronics. Grandma, I had no idea you felt like that. I thought you liked helping us. I do like helping you, Jessica. I love you all so much, but I'd also like to feel loved back, not just needed. Do you understand the difference? I could hear her crying softly through the phone. Sweet Jessica, caught in the middle of adult dysfunction she was too young to fully understand. "Can I come see you?" she asked. "Not because I need anything, just to see you?" "Of course you can, sweetheart. Anytime." She came the next Saturday, taking the subway from Manhattan with a nervous expression and a small bouquet of flowers from a bodega. She was taller than I remembered, more grown up, with her mother's sharp cheekbones but gentler eyes. "Grandma," she said as soon as I opened the door, "I'm sorry I haven't called more. I'm sorry I only reached out when I needed something. Mom does it too, doesn't she?" We spent the afternoon talking in a way we never had before. Not grandmother to child or ATM to customer, but person to person. I told her about Carmen and painting class and the hiking group. She told me about school and her friends and the college applications she was working on. "I want to study social work," she said. "I want to help people who don't have anyone to advocate for them." "That sounds wonderful. What does your mother think?" Jessica's expression darkened slightly. "She wants me to do business or pre-law, something that will make good money. She says helping people is fine as a hobby, but I need to think about my financial future." "And what do you think?" I think maybe there are more important things than money. I mean, Mom has money and she doesn't seem very happy." Out of the mouths of 17-year-olds. This child could see what her mother refused to acknowledge, that happiness couldn't be purchased, borrowed, or inherited. "Jessica," I said, "I want you to know that whatever you decide to study, whatever career you choose, I'll be proud of you. And if you ever need advice or just someone to talk to, I'm here. Not as a bank, just as your grandmother who loves you." She hugged me then, a real hug that lasted longer than politeness required. When she left that evening, she promised to visit again in 2 weeks, and she kept that promise. September brought an unexpected crisis that tested everything I'd learned about boundaries and self-respect. Michael called me directly for the first time in months, not with a text message or through Sarah, but an actual phone call. "Mom," he said, and his voice was different. Smaller, scared. "I'm in the hospital." My heart stopped. Whatever anger I'd been carrying, whatever boundaries I'd built, they all crumbled in that moment. He was my child. 50 years old or 5 years old, he was still my baby boy. "What happened? Where are you? Do you need me to come?" "I'm at Mount Sinai, Queens. I had chest pains at work, and they brought me here in an ambulance. Mom, I don't have insurance. I don't know what I'm going to do." This was it. The test I'd been dreading. The moment when my new strength would meet my old instincts. When my children's real need would collide with my hard-won boundaries. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, then stopped. Something Carmen had said weeks earlier echoed in my mind. "Love doesn't mean fixing everything, Eleanor. Sometimes it means letting people figure out their own solutions." "Michael," I said, sitting back down, "are you okay right now? Are you stable?" "Yeah, they think it was a panic attack, not a heart attack. But the bills? I'm glad you're okay. But honey, I can't pay your medical bills." "Mom, please, I know we've had our problems, but this is different. This is serious." "It is serious. And that's exactly why you need to handle it yourself. There are payment plans, financial counselors at the hospital, charity programs for people without insurance. You're a grown man. You can figure this out." "I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm in a hospital bed and my mother won't help me." The guilt was immediate and crushing. What kind of mother abandons her child in a medical crisis? What kind of person chooses pride over family? But underneath the guilt was something else. A quiet voice that sounded like my own, not the voice of maternal obligation I'd been hearing for 50 years. "Michael, I love you. I will always love you, but I won't enable you anymore. You're 50 years old and you've never had to solve a problem without my checkbook. Maybe it's time you learned how." I hung up and cried for an hour. Then I called Carmen. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked her. "He's in the hospital, Carmen. What if something really is wrong with him?" "Mija," she said gently, "he called you himself. He's well enough to manipulate you. If he was really in danger, would he be calculating how to get money out of you?" She was right. Even in crisis, Michael's first thought hadn't been to reach out for comfort or connection. It had been to figure out how to turn his situation into my problem. 2 days later, Jessica called me. "Grandma, I heard about Uncle Mike. Mom says you refused to help with his hospital bills." "That's right. She says you don't care about family anymore." "What do you think, Jessica? Do you think I don't care about family?" A pause while she considered. I think Uncle Mike always assumes other people will solve his problems. And I think that's not fair to you. It's not about fair or unfair, sweetheart. It's about what's healthy. For him and for me. Did he figure out the hospital thing on his own? He did. Turns out there are programs for people in his situation. He qualified for financial assistance and a payment plan. He didn't need my money after all. He just needed to make some phone calls and fill out some paperwork. So you were right to say no? I was right to let him handle his own life. That's different from saying no to hurt him. I said no to help him. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Grandma, can I tell you something? Sometimes I think about asking you for money for things, and then I stop myself because I realize I just want to see if you'll say yes. Like it's a test of whether you love me. And now I think maybe real love is when someone cares enough to say no when you need to hear it. This child was wiser than all of us combined. October brought Sarah back to my doorstep, but this visit was different from all the others. She didn't have flowers or chocolates or the smile she wore when she wanted something. She looked tired, older, deflated. Mom, can we talk? I let her in and made tea. Real tea, not the cheap bags I'd been using to save money for her emergencies. We sat at my small table, and for the first time in years, she seemed to really see me, not as a resource to be managed, but as a person with thoughts and feelings and needs of her own. Jessica told me about your conversation, Sarah said, about boundaries and respect and, she paused, struggling with words, about feeling loved instead of just needed. I waited. This felt different from her previous apologies, more genuine somehow. I want to understand, she continued. I want to understand how I became someone who only calls her mother when she needs money. That's not who I meant to be. Who did you mean to be? I meant to be a good daughter. I meant to take care of you the way you took care of me. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing you as… She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. As what? As a given. Like you'd always be there. Always say yes. Always fix whatever was broken in my life. I never thought about what that cost you because I never thought you had costs. You were just mom. Infinite mom. But I'm not infinite, Sarah. I'm 78 years old. I have arthritis and high blood pressure and one little social security check that has to cover everything. I'm not infinite. I'm not even abundant. I'm just a person who loves you enough to have forgotten how to love myself. She was crying now. Not the manipulative tears she'd used in the past, but the helpless tears of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth. How do we fix this? She asked. How do we start over? By starting, I said simply. By you visiting me because you want to spend time with me, not because you need something from me. By calling to ask how I'm doing, not to tell me about your problems. By treating me like someone you love instead of someone you manage. But what if I don't know how? What if this pattern is so ingrained that I can't change it? Then you'll learn. The same way I'm learning how to say no. The same way I'm learning that being a good mother doesn't mean being an endless resource. Sarah stayed for 3 hours that day. We talked about her childhood, about the divorce difficulties that were finally settling, about her job and friends and the things that brought her joy. She asked about Carmen and my painting class and the hiking group. She wanted to see my latest watercolors. When she left, she hugged me at the door. Can I come back next weekend? Just to visit? I'd love that. And Mom, I'm going to start paying you back. Not because you demanded it, but because it's the right thing to do. I should have done it years ago. I watched her drive away, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I felt hopeful about who we might become to each other. November surprised me, not because of any family drama or breakthrough, but because of something I discovered about myself. I was happy, not content, not resigned, not cautiously optimistic. Happy. I woke up excited about painting class, about Carmen's stories from her garden, about the new book I was reading. I looked forward to Jessica's visits and Sarah's Sunday phone calls that were now actual conversations rather than one-sided therapy sessions. Michael was still Michael. He'd called twice since the hospital incident, once to thank me for making him figure things out, and once to ask for money that I gently refused. But the burden of his choices no longer lived in my chest like a stone. He was an adult making his own decisions, and I was an adult making mine. The week before Thanksgiving, Jessica brought me an early present, an envelope with her college application essays inside. I wrote about you, Grandma, she said, bouncing slightly with excitement, about what I learned watching you change this year. I read the essay with tears in my eyes. She'd written about witnessing someone discover their self-worth at 78, about learning that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything, about understanding the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. You inspired me to write about something real instead of just trying to impress admissions committees, she said. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay, sweetheart. I'm honored. Grandma, can I ask you something else? How did you know when to stop? How did you know the difference between helping and hurting? I thought about her question while we walked to the small park near my apartment. How had I known? What had changed between March, when I was a woman desperate for any scrap of love, and November, when I was a woman who knew her own worth? I think, I said finally, I stopped measuring my value by how much other people needed me. I started measuring it by how much I needed myself. What do you mean? For years, I thought being needed was the same as being loved. I thought if I could solve everyone's problems, they'd want me around. But need isn't love, Jessica. Need is just need. Love is wanting someone in your life even when you don't need anything from them. Like how you and Carmen spend time together? Exactly. Carmen doesn't need me to pay her bills or fix her problems. I don't need her to take care of me or solve my loneliness. We just enjoy each other's company. We add joy to each other's lives instead of trying to fix what's missing. I want that kind of relationship with you, Jessica said. Not just grandmother-granddaughter, but like friends who happen to be related. I'd like that too. Thanksgiving was different that year. Instead of hosting a dinner for family members who'd show up hungry for food and favors, I accepted Carmen's invitation to join her extended family celebration in Queens. 20 people crowded into her daughter's house, speaking rapid Spanish and English, sharing dishes I'd never tried before, arguing about politics, and laughing at stories I didn't understand but enjoyed anyway. Carmen's family welcomed me like I'd always belonged there. Her grandson played guitar while her daughter-in-law taught me to dance to salsa music in the living room. Her son, a doctor in Manhattan, asked about my painting hobby with genuine interest, not the polite attention I was used to from my own children. "You know what I love about watercolors?" he said, examining the small painting I'd brought as a hostess gift. "They're impossible to control completely. You have to let them do what they want to do and find beauty in the unexpected results." "That's a lesson I'm still learning," I told him. Sarah called that evening to wish me happy Thanksgiving. She was spending the holiday with her boyfriend's family, and for the first time in years, I hadn't felt abandoned by her absence. I had my own plans, my own people, my own life. "How was your day, Mom?" she asked, and I could hear that she really wanted to know. I told her about Carmen's family, about learning to dance, about the incredible food and the warmth of being included in someone else's tradition. "You sound happy," Sarah said. "Really happy." "I am. I'm glad. And Mom, I'm proud of you for building this new life, for making friends, for not waiting around for us to figure out how to be better children. I'm proud of you too, for wanting to learn." December brought an unexpected test of my new boundaries. Michael called 2 weeks before Christmas with his most manipulative request yet. "Mom, I know things have been complicated between us this year, but I've been thinking maybe we could spend Christmas together, just the family, like old times." Old times. When I'd spent December stressed and exhausted, cooking elaborate meals for people who'd criticized the food, buying expensive gifts for people who'd already started mentally spending my next check, pretending everything was perfect while my heart broke a little more each holiday season. "That sounds nice, Michael, but I already have plans for Christmas." "Plans? What kind of plans?" "Carmen and I are volunteering at a shelter on Christmas Eve, and then we're going to see a movie and have Chinese food on Christmas Day. It's our new tradition." "You're choosing strangers over your own family?" There it was again. The false choice between loving other people and loving them. As if my heart was a pie with limited slices. As if caring about new friends meant caring less about old family. "I'm choosing people who appreciate my company over people who only call when they want something." "Mom, that's not fair. I've been working on myself. I've been thinking about what you said." "I'm glad to hear that, Michael. How's work going? Are you caught up on your bills?" A pause. "Well, that's actually part of what I wanted to talk to you about. I had some unexpected expenses this month." "Michael, just hear me out. I know you don't want to lend money anymore, so I was thinking maybe you could give me something for Christmas, maybe enough to catch up on rent. Then we'd be even, and I could focus on the new year." Even. As if 50 years of financial support could be balanced by one refused Christmas gift. As if love was a ledger where debts could be forgiven through manipulation. "No, Michael. But it's Christmas." "Yes, it is Christmas. And my gift to you is the same gift I've been giving you all year. The opportunity to solve your own problems. I can't believe how selfish you've become. Selfish. The word that had controlled me for decades. The accusation that had made me empty my bank account and my soul over and over again. But it didn't have power over me. If taking care of myself is selfish, I said, then I'm learning to be proudly selfish. I spent Christmas Eve serving dinner at a homeless shelter in Manhattan with Carmen and a dozen other volunteers. The gratitude in people's eyes when we handed them plates of food. The way they said, "Thank you," like we'd given them something precious instead of just doing what humans should do for each other, filled me with more joy than any family dinner had in years. Christmas Day was perfect in its simplicity. Carmen and I watched classic movies, ate Chinese takeout straight from the containers, and painted watercolor Christmas trees that looked more like green clouds than evergreens. No stress, no performance, no walking on eggshells around people who treated my love like a given. Sarah called that evening. "Mom, how was your Christmas?" I told her about the shelter, about the movie marathon, about the peaceful day with my chosen family. It sounds wonderful, she said, and I could hear something like envy in her voice. My Christmas was chaotic. Brad's family is so demanding, and everyone kept asking when we're getting married, and his mother made all these comments about my divorce. I'm sorry it was stressful, sweetheart. Mom, can I ask you something? Do you think it's too late for us? For our family? What do you mean? I mean, do you think we can learn to be the kind of family that actually enjoys spending time together, instead of just going through the motions because we're supposed to? I think it's never too late to change, Sarah. But everyone has to want it. Everyone has to be willing to do the work. What kind of work? The work of seeing each other as whole people instead of just the roles we play. The work of building relationships based on mutual respect instead of need and obligation. The work of loving without keeping score. I want to do that work, Mom. I want to know who you are when you're not taking care of everyone else. I want you to know who I am when I'm not falling apart. Then we can start there. January brought a revelation I hadn't expected. I realized I'd stopped being angry, not just at my children, but at the years I'd lost, the money I'd wasted, the boundaries I'd never learned to set. The anger had been keeping me tethered to old patterns, defining myself by what I'd given up rather than what I was choosing now. Without anger as fuel, I had space for other emotions, curiosity about what came next, excitement about possibilities I'd never considered, peace with the woman I was becoming. Jessica started her second semester of senior year and called me weekly with college updates. She'd been accepted to 3 social work programs and was leaning toward the one in Philadelphia. It's only 2 hours away by train, she said. Close enough to visit, but far enough to feel independent. What do you think, Grandma? I think you should choose the program that feels right to you, not the one that's convenient for other people. Even if it means I'll see you less often? Jessica, you're 17 years old. Your job is to build your own life, not to manage mine. If you choose a school based on my convenience, you'll resent me later. Choose based on your dreams. But what if I miss you? Then you'll call. And you'll visit when you can. And we'll figure out ways to stay close even when we're far apart. Love isn't about geography, sweetheart. February marked 1 year since my rebellion began. I celebrated by treating Carmen and myself to a weekend trip to the Hudson Valley. We stayed in a bed and breakfast with flowered wallpaper and crooked floors, painted landscapes from the porch, and talked about our dreams for the coming year. What do you want to do next? Carmen asked as we watched the sun set over the river. I want to travel, I said without hesitation. I've never been anywhere except New York and the places we went for family obligations. I want to see the country, maybe even the world. Where would you go first? New England in the fall. I've seen pictures of the leaves changing color, but I've never seen it in person. Let's do it, Carmen said. Let's plan a real trip, somewhere we've never been, somewhere we don't have to worry about anyone else's needs or schedules. Can we afford it? Mija, we're in our 70s. If not now, when? That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed and listening to country sounds instead of city noise, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt like myself, not a mother or a caretaker or a problem solver, just Eleanor. A woman who liked beautiful colors and quiet mornings and conversations that meandered through interesting topics without destination. March brought an unexpected phone call from Michael. Not asking for money, not creating a crisis, just calling to talk. Mom, I've been in therapy, he said without preamble. Trying to figure out why I never learned to handle my own problems. How's that going? It's hard. The therapist says I learned early that someone would always rescue me, so I never developed coping skills. She says it's not entirely my fault, but it's entirely my responsibility to change it. That sounds right. I want you to know that I understand now. What you did this year, setting boundaries, it wasn't mean. It was necessary. I just wish it hadn't taken me 50 years to figure that out. It's never too late to learn, Michael. I got a second job, he said, pride evident in his voice. Driving for a delivery service 3 nights a week. It's not glamorous, but it's helping me catch up on my debts. I'm proud of you for doing that. Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that no is a fine answer. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Not because I need anything, just because I miss talking to you. The request was so simple, so free of agenda, that it took my breath away. This was what I'd wanted all along. Not to be needed, but to be enjoyed. I'd love that, Michael. We met at a small Italian restaurant in Astoria the following week. He looked different, somehow lighter, less frantic. He asked about my painting, about Carmen, about the hiking group. He told me about his therapy, his new job, the changes he was trying to make. I have something for you, he said as we finished our meal, pulling out a small wrapped package. Inside was a watercolor set, professional quality, far nicer than the student supplies I'd been using. I noticed your paintings in the background when Jessica video called from your apartment, he explained. I asked her what kind of supplies you were using, and she said you were making do with basic stuff. I thought you deserved better. Michael, this is too expensive. You can't afford… Mom, I can afford it because I saved money instead of spending it on something stupid. And I wanted to get you something that supported your new interests instead of just defaulting to flowers or candy. I cried right there in the restaurant. Not from sadness or relief, but from recognition. This was my son. Not the crisis-prone man-child who dominated our relationship for decades, but the thoughtful, capable person I'd always hoped he could become. April brought Sarah's birthday, and for the first time in years, I didn't stress about finding the perfect gift or planning the perfect celebration. Instead, I asked her what she'd like to do. Actually, Mom, I was hoping we could spend the day together. Just us. Maybe we could go to that botanical garden you're always talking about with Carmen? We spent her 46th birthday walking through the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, looking at cherry blossoms and having the kinds of conversations we'd never made time for when our relationship was defined by crisis and rescue. Mom, I've been thinking about something, Sarah said as we sat by the rose garden. I don't think I really knew you until this year. What do you mean? I mean, I knew you as my mother. The person who took care of things, who solved problems, who was always available. But I didn't know you as Eleanor, a person with interests and friends and opinions about things that had nothing to do with me. I didn't know myself as Eleanor either, I admitted. I'd been other people's mother for so long that I forgot I was anything else. What's your favorite thing about being Eleanor instead of just being our mom? The freedom to make mistakes. When I was just your mother, I had to be perfect all the time. I couldn't have bad days or selfish moments or needs of my own. Eleanor gets to be human. I like Eleanor, Sarah said. She seems happier than the mom I grew up with. She is happier. She's also lonelier sometimes, but it's a different kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness of being real instead of being what other people need. I want to know Eleanor better, Sarah said. Will you teach me how? We can teach each other. May brought Jessica's high school graduation. The ceremony was long and hot, held in a gymnasium that smelled like cleaning supplies and adolescent anxiety. When they called Jessica's name, she found me in the crowd and waved, her smile bright enough to power the building. At the party afterward, I watched my granddaughter move through her friends and their families with confidence and grace. She'd grown into someone I barely recognized from the sullen teenager who used to roll her eyes at family gatherings. Grandma Eleanor. She appeared at my side with a young man in tow. This is Marcus, my boyfriend. Marcus, this is my amazing grandmother I've been telling you about. Marcus shook my hand with genuine respect. Jessica talks about you all the time, Mrs. Eleanor. She says you're the one who taught her about standing up for herself. I think we taught each other, I said. Later, as the crowd thinned, Jessica found me again. Grandma, I have something to tell you. I got into the social work program at Temple University in Philadelphia. Full scholarship. Jessica, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I want you to know that your example this year helped me write my application essays. Learning to set boundaries, learning that love doesn't mean accepting bad treatment, learning that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Those are the stories that got me the scholarship. Those are your stories, sweetheart. I just happened to be figuring things out at the same time you were. Can I tell you something else? I'm not scared about college anymore. I used to worry about being away from family, about missing out on things. But watching you build this whole new life at 78 made me realize that the best adventures come when you're brave enough to try something new. You're going to do amazing things, Jessica. We both are, Grandma. We both are. June brought the trip Carmen and I had been planning. 10 days in New England, staying in small inns and painting landscapes we'd only seen in pictures. We rented a car, split the driving, and meandered through Vermont and New Hampshire like we had all the time in the world. This is what retirement should feel like, Carmen said as we set up our easels by a lake in the Green Mountains. Not sitting around waiting for family to remember we exist, but actually living. I spent so many years postponing happiness, I said, mixing blues and greens on my palette, always thinking that later, when the kids were settled, when I had more money, when Robert retired, then we'd start really enjoying life. But later kept getting later. What would you tell your younger self now if you could? I'd tell her that love is not the same as service. That you can care about people without fixing them. That saying no sometimes makes yes more meaningful. What else? I thought about it while I painted the way sunlight danced on water. I'd tell her that she's enough, just as she is, without having to earn love or prove her worth through sacrifice. I'd tell her that she deserves to be happy. The painting I created that day wasn't technically perfect. The perspective was slightly off and the colors bled into each other in ways I hadn't intended, but it was beautiful anyway, full of life and spontaneity and joy. like the life I was finally learning to live. July brought a surprise visit from Michael and Sarah together. They'd coordinated their schedules without telling me, planning a small celebration for my 79th birthday. "We wanted to do something for you instead of asking you to do something for us," Sarah explained as they set up a picnic in Flushing Meadows Park. "And we wanted to meet Carmen properly," Michael added, "since Jessica says she's basically family now." The afternoon was lovely in its ordinariness. We ate sandwiches and played cards. Carmen taught Michael and Sarah some Spanish phrases. Sarah showed interest in my latest paintings, asking technical questions about technique and color choices. Michael told stories about his therapy sessions that were funny rather than crisis-filled. "Mom, I have something to give you," Sarah said as we packed up the picnic. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $2,000. "Sarah, you don't need to—" "It's not everything I owe you," she said, "but it's a start. And it's not because you asked for it or demanded it. It's because it's right. I have something too," Michael said, pulling out his own envelope. $500. "I know it's not much, but I wanted you to know that I'm serious about changing how we do things." I looked at these two middle-aged people who were my children, but also, increasingly, individuals I was getting to know as adults. Flawed adults like all of us, but adults who were trying to grow. "Thank you both," I said. "Not for the money, although I appreciate it. Thank you for wanting to build something different with me." August brought Jessica's departure for college. The night before she left, she came to have dinner with me and Carmen. We made her favorite meal, Carmen's chicken and rice with my attempt at homemade biscuits, and talked about everything except goodbyes. "Grandma, will you write to me?" Jessica asked as we did dishes together. "Real letters, not just texts. If you write back, I promise. And I promise to call just to talk, not because I need anything. I want to hear about your painting classes and your adventures with Carmen, and whatever new thing you're trying. What new thing do you think I should try? I don't know. What have you always wanted to do but never had time for?" I thought about it while I dried a plate. "I think I'd like to learn piano. I always loved music, but there was never money or time for lessons." "Then you should do it. Grandma, you have like 10 or 15 good years left, maybe more. That's enough time to get pretty good at piano. 10 or 15 good years. When you're young, that sounds like nothing. When you're 79, it sounds like a gift. Enough time to learn new things, see new places, become someone you never got the chance to be when you were busy being everyone else's solution." September brought quiet. Jessica was settled in college, calling weekly with stories about classes and friends and the work-study job she'd gotten in the admissions office. Sarah was dating someone new, someone who seemed to appreciate her independence rather than her helpfulness. Michael was still in therapy, still working 2 jobs, still figuring out how to be an adult at 50. Carmen and I signed up for a beginning piano class at the community center. We were easily the oldest students, surrounded by children whose fingers moved across the keys with natural grace, while we struggled to remember which hand played which notes. "This is humbling," Carmen said after our 3rd lesson, flexing her arthritic fingers. "But it's also wonderful," I said. "When was the last time you were a beginner at something? When was the last time you gave yourself permission to be terrible while you learned?" October brought an unexpected phone call that tested how much I'd really changed. It was from David, my former son-in-law, Sarah's ex-husband. I hadn't spoken to him since their divorce was finalized. "Eleanor, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Sarah gave me your number. I wanted to ask you about something." My first instinct was familiar panic. What crisis needed my intervention? What problem required my resources? But I took a breath and waited. "I'm getting married again," David continued, "to someone wonderful who you'd really like. And Sarah and I have worked things out. We're actually friends now. Better friends than we were spouses." "That's wonderful, David. I'm happy for both of you. The thing is, my fiancé doesn't have much family, and she's nervous about big celebrations. We're having a small wedding next month, and I was wondering, would you consider coming? Not as Sarah's mother or my ex-mother-in-law, but just as someone I care about who I'd like to have there." The request surprised me. Not because David was getting married, but because he wanted me there as myself, not in my role as family problem solver. "I'd be honored to come," I said. The wedding was lovely, small and intimate, held in a community garden in Brooklyn with 20 guests and a string quartet. David's bride, Maria, was warm and genuine, the kind of person who asked real questions and listened to real answers. "David's told me so much about you," she said when we were introduced. "About how you supported him through the divorce, how you helped him understand that the end of a marriage doesn't have to mean the end of caring." I had supported him, I realized, not with money or crisis management, but with kindness during a difficult time. I'd listened when he needed to process his feelings, offered perspective when he asked for it, treated him with respect even when his marriage to my daughter was falling apart. You raised an incredible daughter, Maria continued. Sarah's become one of my closest friends. I know that's unusual, but she's so genuine and strong. You should be proud. I was proud. Not because Sarah was doing what I wanted her to do, but because she was becoming who she wanted to be. The difference mattered more than I could articulate. November brought Thanksgiving again, and this time I was hosting. Not a command performance for family members who showed up hungry and distracted, but a chosen gathering of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Carmen came with her famous sancocho. Sarah came with her boyfriend James, a kind man who asked about my paintings and genuinely listened to the answers. Michael came alone but relaxed, bearing wine and stories from his new job as a nighttime security guard at an art museum. I get to walk through galleries full of beautiful things all night, he explained. It's quiet and peaceful. And I've started reading about the artists. Did you know Georgia O'Keeffe didn't start painting flowers until she was in her 30s? I didn't know that. She said she painted them because she wanted to make people pay attention to their beauty. She wanted to help people see things they might otherwise ignore. Like watercolors, I thought. Like elderly women finding their voices. Like 50-year-old men learning to solve their own problems. Beauty in unexpected places, waiting for someone to notice. Jessica called from Philadelphia during dessert, joining us via video chat from her dorm room. She looked happy and tired, the way college freshmen should look. Tell us about school, Sarah said, leaning into the phone screen. It's amazing. Hard, but amazing. I'm taking a class called Human Development Across the Lifespan, and we've been talking about something called generativity. It's this idea that part of growing older successfully is finding ways to contribute to future generations, to leave something positive behind. What kind of contributions? Carmen asked. It could be raising children, or teaching, or mentoring, or creating art, or just modeling how to live well. The professor says some of the most generative people are those who reinvent themselves later in life, who show younger people that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. I caught Carmen's eye across the table and smiled. Generativity. We were becoming generative women, contributing to the world not through sacrifice or service, but through example, through showing that dignity and self-respect and joy were possible at any age. December brought Christmas again, and I realized I was no longer afraid of holidays, no longer anxious about gift budgets or complicated family dynamics or managing other people's expectations. I gave thoughtful presents I could afford, art supplies for Jessica, a cookbook for Sarah, a massage gift certificate for Michael's chronic back pain from his security job. Mom, this is perfect, Sarah said, unwrapping a beginner's watercolor set identical to the one Michael had given me 2 years earlier. I've been wanting to try painting. Maybe you could teach me sometime? I'd love that. On New Year's Eve, Carmen and I went to Times Square. Not to see the ball drop. We were far too old and wise to stand crushed in a crowd for hours, but to walk around the edges, to soak in the energy of the city we'd both called home for so many years. What do you want for this new year? Carmen asked as we watched fireworks reflect off skyscraper windows. More of the same, I said. More painting, more music lessons, more trips. More conversations with Jessica, more dinners with Sarah and Michael when they want company instead of solutions. More friendship with you. What about romance? She asked with a mischievous smile. We're not dead yet, you know. I laughed. What about it? Are you suggesting I start dating at 79? Why not? My neighbor's widow started dating at 82. She met a lovely man at her water aerobics class. The idea seemed absurd and wonderful in equal measure. Dating. At my age, with my schedule full of things I actually enjoyed, with my sense of self finally intact, would romance be possible? Would it be welcome? Maybe, I said, but only if I find someone who likes Eleanor, not someone who needs her to fix his life. That's the spirit. January brought piano progress. After 4 months of lessons, I could play simple melodies with both hands. Carmen and I practiced together in the community center's music room, stumbling through scales and celebrating small victories. You know what I love about this? I said during one practice session. Nobody needs me to be good at it. I'm not learning piano to help anyone else or fix anyone's problems. I'm doing it just because it brings me joy. Pure joy, Carmen agreed, hitting a wrong note and laughing. When was the last time we did anything for pure joy? February brought a call that took my breath away. Jessica, home for winter break, had been showing my paintings to her art professor. Grandma, she wants to include 3 of your pieces in the Student Family Art Show next month. She says your use of color is naturally intuitive, and your brushwork has a freedom that takes some people years to develop. She wants to show my paintings? In a real art show? With labels and everything? Eleanor Martinez, watercolor, age 79. Grandma? You're going to be a real artist. A real artist. At 79, after 2 years of Wednesday evening classes, I was going to be in an art show. Not because I was someone's mother or grandmother, but because I'd created something beautiful enough to share with the world. March brought the art show opening. Carmen, Sarah, Michael, and Jessica all came to see my 3 paintings hanging on the gallery walls with proper lighting and little cards bearing my name. I stood in front of my landscape of the Hudson Valley, accepting compliments from strangers who had no idea I was a beginner, who saw only beauty where I had seen uncertainty. "Mom, these are really good," Michael said, genuine surprise in his voice. "I mean, I knew you were taking classes, but I didn't realize you were this good." "I didn't realize it either," I admitted. "I thought I was just playing around." "Maybe that's the secret," Sarah said. "Maybe when you're not trying to be perfect, when you're just exploring what's possible, that's when the magic happens." Magic. Yes, that's what this felt like. Not the magic of transformation. That had been hard work and difficult choices and years of slowly changing patterns. But the magic of discovery. Of finding out that Eleanor, separate from her roles as mother and caretaker and problem solver, was someone worth knowing. The art show sold one of my paintings to a stranger who said it reminded her of summers at her grandmother's house. $50 that represented more than money. It represented recognition that I had something valuable to offer the world beyond my capacity to help others. April brought Sarah's engagement to James. She called me before she called anyone else, her voice bright with excitement and nerves. "Mom, James proposed. We're engaged." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both. We want to have the wedding here in New York. Something small and beautiful. Will you help me plan it?" The old Eleanor would have said yes immediately, would have begun mentally organizing and budgeting and coordinating before the conversation ended. The new Eleanor took a breath. "I'd love to be involved, Sarah. What kind of help are you looking for?" "Well, I was hoping you could handle the flowers and maybe coordinate with the caterer and make sure everyone knows where to be when—" a familiar list of tasks that would consume months of my time and energy, but also a daughter who wanted her mother's involvement in one of the most important days of her life. "Sarah, I want to celebrate with you, and I want to help in ways that feel meaningful to both of us. But I can't be your wedding planner. I'm 79 years old, and I have my own life to manage." Silence. But not the angry silence of our past conflicts. Thoughtful silence. "You're right," she said finally. "I was falling back into old patterns, wasn't I? Assuming you'd take care of everything so I wouldn't have to. It's an easy pattern to fall into. But maybe we could find a different way. Maybe you could handle the logistics, and I could contribute something more personal." "What do you mean?" "Maybe I could paint something for you. A watercolor of the venue or flowers from your bouquet or something that captures what the day means to you." "Mom, that would be perfect. Something no one else could give us. Something that comes from your heart instead of your to-do list." May brought wedding preparations that felt completely different from the stressful family events of the past. Sarah hired a professional planner and did her own research on flowers and venues. I painted practice versions of bouquet compositions and worked on a landscape of the garden where they'd hold their ceremony. Michael offered to walk Sarah down the aisle since their father had passed away years earlier. It was his idea, freely given, not assigned as a family obligation. Watching my children coordinate with each other as equals, as adults who cared about each other without keeping score, filled me with pride I'd never expected to feel. June brought the wedding itself, small and elegant, held in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden where Sarah and I had spent her birthday the year before. Carmen came as my guest, wearing the blue dress she'd bought for the occasion and a smile that rivaled the bride's. My painting of the ceremony site hung on an easel during cocktail hour, and guests kept asking who the artist was. When they found out it was the bride's 79-year-old mother, their surprise and appreciation felt like another small victory for reinvention. "Eleanor, this is stunning," James's mother said, studying my brushwork. "Have you been painting long?" 3 years, I said. "I started when I was 76. "That's incredible. I always assumed people had to start young to be good at art." "I assumed that too," I said. Turns out we were both wrong. During the reception, Sarah asked me to dance with her. As we swayed to music played by the string quartet she'd hired, she whispered in my ear, "Thank you for becoming yourself, Mom. I like the woman you turned out to be." "I like her too," I whispered back. "And I like the woman you're becoming." July brought a quiet milestone. Carmen and I realized we'd been friends for 3 years now. Since that first day she'd brought me soup and stayed for coffee. 3 years of growing into our independence together, of supporting each other's discoveries, of proving that new relationships could bloom at any age. "What should we do to celebrate?" Carmen asked as we walked through our neighborhood. noting the changes that had accumulated over our friendship. New restaurants we wanted to try, community gardens we'd helped plant, faces we recognized from yoga class or the library. Let's plan another trip, I said. Somewhere we've never been. Somewhere that requires us to be brave. Where did you have in mind? California. I want to see the Pacific Ocean. I want to paint the sunset from a different coast. Let's do it. August brought Jessica home for summer break with news that made me prouder than any academic achievement could have. Grandma, I want to tell you about my internship. I'm working with elderly clients who've been financially exploited by family members, helping them understand their legal rights, connecting them with resources, supporting them through the process of setting boundaries with adult children who've been taking advantage. That sounds like difficult work. It is, but also important. Do you know how common it is? Financial abuse of elderly people by their own families? It happens way more than anyone talks about. I thought about the years I'd spent writing checks and emptying accounts, believing that love required financial sacrifice. How many other grandmothers and grandfathers were trapped in similar patterns, afraid that saying no meant losing their families entirely. What do you tell them? Your clients? I tell them that they deserve respect, that love doesn't have a price tag, that they can care about their families without bankrupting themselves. I tell them about you, Grandma, about how you changed everything at 78. You tell them about me? I tell them that it's never too late to remember your worth, that you can love people and still protect yourself. That setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop being a good mother or father or grandparent. It means you start being a whole person. My granddaughter was out in the world helping other elderly people find their voices, using lessons she'd learned watching me find mine. The generativity professor had talked about was real, was happening, was rippling through the world in ways I could never have planned. September brought Jessica's return to school and my return to piano lessons with renewed focus. Carmen and I had progressed enough to play simple duets, our fingers finding harmonies that felt like musical conversations. I have an idea, Carmen said after we successfully navigated a piece by Mozart. What if we performed in the community center's talent show? Us? At our age? Especially at our age. When's the next time we'll get the chance to be ridiculous in public? October brought our debut performance, two women in their 70s and late 70s, playing a slightly shaky but heartfelt duet for an audience of neighbors and friends. We wore matching red cardigans Carmen had found at a thrift store, and we smiled through every missed note. The audience loved us, not because we were technically perfect, but because we were joyful, because we were proof that it's never too late to try something new, to be beginners, to risk looking foolish in service of having fun. You ladies are an inspiration, said Mrs. Patterson from the third floor. I've been wanting to try painting, but I thought I was too old to start. Mrs. Patterson, I said. The only thing worse than starting something at 80 is wishing you'd started something at 80. November brought another Thanksgiving, another gathering of chosen family. This year the group had expanded. Carmen's son visited from Manhattan with his wife and teenage daughter. Sarah and James joined us, along with Michael and his new girlfriend, a woman his age who seemed genuinely fond of his company rather than his ability to solve her problems. I want to say something, Michael announced as we finished dinner. I want to thank Mom for teaching me the hardest lesson I've ever learned. What lesson was that? Carmen asked. That people can love you and still not fix all your problems. That respecting someone sometimes means letting them struggle. That the best help isn't always immediate help. And Tai, Sarah added, raising her wine glass. I want to thank her for showing us that mothers are whole people, not just services we can access whenever we need something. And I, said Jessica via video call from Philadelphia, want to thank Grandma Eleanor for proving that reinvention is possible at any age, and that the most powerful word in the English language is no when it needs to be said. Carmen raised her glass too. And I want to thank Eleanor for teaching me that the best friendships are the ones where you choose each other every day, not because you have to, but because you want to. I looked around the table at these people who had become my family not through obligation or guilt or need, but through genuine affection and mutual respect. This was what love looked like when it wasn't transactional. This was what relationships felt like when they were built on choice rather than duty. I want to thank all of you, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, for teaching me the difference between being needed and being loved, for showing me that some of the best years of your life can come after you thought the story was over. December brought Christmas cards from people I'd never expected to hear from again. David and Maria, sending photos from their first Christmas as a married couple. Colleagues from the painting class, sharing pictures of their latest work. Even the bus driver who'd told me to get off that day 2 years ago. Somehow Carmen had tracked him down and told him my story, and he'd sent a card apologizing for his rudeness and congratulating me on finding my voice. People remember kindness, Carmen said as we sorted through the cards. And they remember courage. You've given both to everyone who knows you. January brought New Year's resolutions that felt different from any I'd made before. Not resolutions to be better for other people, but to be truer to myself, to take the California trip Carmen and I had been planning, to enter more art shows, to keep learning piano until I could play pieces that moved me to tears. What do you want most this year? Carmen asked as we walked along the East River, watching the city lights reflect on dark water. I want to keep becoming, I said. I spent so many years being static, being whoever other people needed me to be. Now I want to keep changing, keep growing, keep surprising myself with what's possible. What do you think is possible? Everything, I said, and meant it. At almost 80 years old, I think everything is still possible. February brought a letter addressed to me personally, not to Mrs. Martinez or Eleanor's family, but to Eleanor Martinez, artist. It was from a gallery in Soho that had seen my work in the Student Family Show and wanted to include one of my paintings in a group exhibition of late-blooming artists. They want to show my work in Soho, I told Carmen, holding the letter with trembling hands. In a real gallery with real artists. You are a real artist, Carmen said firmly. You have been since the first time you put brush to paper and created something beautiful. March brought the gallery opening in Manhattan. Carmen, Sarah, Michael, and Jessica all came to see my painting hanging on a white wall with elegant lighting and a price tag that made my head spin. A woman my age stopped in front of my landscape and stood there for several minutes, just looking. "Excuse me," she finally said. "Are you the artist?" "I am. This painting, it makes me feel hopeful, like it's never too late to start over." "It's not," I said. "I started painting at 76. Really, I'm 74 and I've always wanted to write poetry but thought it was too late." "It's not too late," I said, handing her one of the business cards the gallery had made for me. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be." She bought my painting. A stranger who'd been moved by something I created in my little apartment in Queens. Something born from colors I mixed on Wednesday evenings while learning to be brave. April brought spring and with it, the California trip Carmen and I had been planning. 2 weeks driving up the Pacific Coast Highway, staying in small hotels, painting landscapes that took our breath away. Standing on the beach in Monterey, watching waves crash against rocks while seagulls wheeled overhead, I thought about the woman who used to live in my body. The woman who measured her worth by her usefulness. Who believed love required complete self-sacrifice. Who thought her story was essentially over at 76. "What are you thinking about?" Carmen asked, setting up her easel beside mine. "I'm thinking about the bus," I said. About what would have happened if I'd gotten off when the driver told me to. If I'd just accepted his dismissal and continued being invisible. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. I stayed. I found my voice. I found my worth. I found you. We found each other," Carmen corrected, "and we found ourselves." That evening, in a restaurant overlooking the Pacific, Carmen raised her wine glass in a toast. "To Eleanor," she said, "who taught me that saying no can be an act of love, who showed me that friendship can bloom at 70-something, who proves every day that the most beautiful art comes from the bravest hearts." "To Carmen," I replied, "who knocked on my door with soup and stayed for life, who shows me daily that kindness is a choice we make, not a debt we owe. To us," we said together, "for having the courage to find out who we really are." May brought my 80th birthday, celebrated not with obligatory family dinners and gifts that missed the mark, but with a party I planned myself. I rented a space at the community center and invited everyone who mattered. Carmen and her family, my painting class, the hiking group, Sarah and James, Michael and his girlfriend, Jessica, home from college, and a dozen neighbors who'd become friends. The decorations were simple. My paintings hung around the room like a gallery of my growth. The cake was chocolate, my favorite, not whatever flavor other people preferred. The music was jazz, which I'd recently discovered I loved, not background noise chosen to offend no one. "Speech," someone called out as we finished dinner. I stood up on unsteady legs, looking around the room at faces that reflected genuine affection rather than obligation. 3 years ago, I said, I was a woman who measured her worth by how much other people needed her. I was so afraid of being alone that I forgot the difference between solitude and loneliness, between love and manipulation, between helping and enabling. Nods around the room, understanding in eyes that had seen their own versions of this struggle. Today, I'm surrounded by people who choose to be here not because they have to, but because they want to. People who see me as Eleanor, not just as someone's mother or grandmother or checkbook. Today, I know that love is a gift, not a transaction. That respect is earned through boundaries, not erased by them. That it's never too late to remember who you are, and it's never too early to start becoming who you want to be. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't just about blood, but about who shows up, about who stays, about who celebrates your growth instead of mourning your changes. I looked at Sarah, who was crying openly, at Michael, who was smiling through his own tears, at Jessica, who was recording the whole speech on her phone to share with friends who'd become invested in Grandma Eleanor's transformation story. I used to think my story was ending, I said. Now I know it was just beginning. The summer of my 80th year brought more adventures than I'd had in the previous decade combined. Carmen and I took a painting workshop in Provence, where we learned techniques from local artists and drank wine that tasted like sunlight filtered through grapevines. I enrolled in intermediate piano lessons and discovered I had a natural affinity for Chopin. Jessica spent 2 weeks with me in August, not because she had to, but because she wanted to document my story for a social work journal article about successful aging. "Grandma, can you explain what changed?" she asked one evening as we painted side by side on my fire escape. Not just the external stuff, but the internal shift that made everything else possible? I thought about her question while mixing colors for the sunset we were capturing. I think, I said finally, I stopped being afraid of disappointing people. For 76 years, I made decisions based on what would make other people happy, or comfortable, or grateful. The idea of someone being upset with me, especially family, was more terrifying than my own unhappiness. What changed that? Realizing that people who love you don't want you to sacrifice yourself for their comfort, and people who expect you to sacrifice yourself don't really love you. They love what you can do for them. But wasn't it hard? Risking their anger? It was terrifying, I admitted. But you know what was harder? Living as half a person. Being needed but not known. Being useful but not valued. The risk of losing conditional love was worth taking for the chance of finding unconditional respect. September brought Jessica's senior year of college, and my return to regular routines with a sense of contentment I'd never experienced before. Piano on Tuesdays, painting on Wednesdays, hiking on Saturdays, dinner with Sarah once a week when our schedules allowed, phone calls with Michael that lasted longer than his crisis updates used to, visits from Jessica that felt like friendship enriching both our lives. October brought an invitation I hadn't expected. The senior center where I'd been heading that day on the bus reached out through Carmen, who'd mentioned my story to a social worker there. They wanted me to speak to a support group of elderly people dealing with financial exploitation by family members. "I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice," I told the director when she called. "We're not looking for advice," she said. "We're looking for hope. These people need to hear from someone who found a way out, who built a life worth living after setting boundaries with adult children." The support group met on Thursday evenings in a circle of folding chairs that reminded me of my painting class. 12 people, ages 65 to 88, each carrying stories of financial manipulation, emotional blackmail, and the peculiar exhaustion that comes from loving people who treat you badly. "My son hasn't visited in 2 years," said an 85-year-old woman named Rose, "but he calls every month asking for money. Last week he wanted $3,000 for car repairs. When I said I couldn't afford it, he said I obviously don't care about his safety." Nods around the circle. Everyone recognized the guilt, the manipulation, the way love could be weaponized by the people who were supposed to protect it. "My daughter moved back home after her divorce," shared a 70-year-old man named Frank. "That was 3 years ago. She doesn't pay rent, doesn't help with groceries, and gets angry when I ask her to clean up after herself. But when I suggest she find her own place, she cries and says I'm abandoning her when she needs me most." More nods. More recognition of patterns that felt impossible to break. I told them my story, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who'd found a path through the same maze they were navigating. I talked about the bus, about saying no for the first time, about the difference between love and enabling. "But weren't you afraid they'd stop loving you?" Rose asked. "I was terrified," I said. But then I realized something important. If their love was conditional on my financial support, it wasn't love at all. It was a business transaction disguised as family affection. "What if we're wrong, though?" Frank asked. "What if they really do need our help, and we're being selfish by setting boundaries?" "Then they'll figure it out," I said. "The same way millions of other adults figure out their problems without turning their parents into personal banks." "Frank, your daughter is how old?" 43. At 43, she should know how to pay rent and buy groceries and clean up after herself. By continuing to do those things for her, you're not helping her. You're preventing her from learning skills she needs to be successful. But what if she ends up homeless? What if she can't manage on her own? Then she'll learn to manage. Adults are remarkably adaptable when they don't have other options. The question isn't whether she can take care of herself, it's whether you can live with letting her try. I started attending the support group regularly, not as a professional, but as a peer who'd walked this path and found light on the other side. Hearing their stories reminded me of how far I'd come, and sharing my experience helped them see possibilities they hadn't considered. November brought Thanksgiving with the deepest gratitude I'd ever felt. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Real relationships based on mutual respect. Real love that didn't require me to shrink myself. Real peace that came from knowing my own worth. December brought Christmas shopping that felt like joy instead of obligation. I bought presents I could afford for people who would appreciate them, not expensive gifts to prove my love to people who measured it by dollar amounts. January of my 81st year brought a letter from the gallery in Soho. They wanted to offer me a solo show in the fall. 24 paintings, displayed for a month, with my name on the announcement cards and advertising. Eleanor Martinez, late bloomer, opening reception, October 15th. Carmen, I said, calling her immediately. They want to give me a solo show. Of course they do. Your work is beautiful. But I'm 80 years old and I've been painting for less than 5 years. So, Grandma Moses didn't start painting until she was 78, and she had shows at the Museum of Modern Art. Really? Really? Eleanor, there's something magical about art created by people who aren't trying to build careers or impress anyone. Your paintings have joy in them because you paint for love, not for success. February brought intensive preparation for the show. I had 15 paintings ready and needed 9 more. Carmen and I went on painting excursions every weekend, capturing scenes from our travels, our neighborhood, our daily lives. I painted the view from my apartment window, the one I'd stared through during my loneliest years. In my version, it wasn't bleak urban landscape, but a symphony of color and movement, life happening in 1,000 small ways. I painted Carmen's hands, weathered and elegant, holding a coffee cup during one of our morning conversations. I painted Jessica's laugh, capturing the moment when joy transforms a face into pure light. I painted the bus where everything changed, not as a place of humiliation, but as the site of my rebirth, the place where I learned that staying put sometimes means moving forward. March brought visits from art magazine photographers who wanted to document the phenomenon of elderly artists. I found their fascination both flattering and bemusing. Was it really so unusual for someone to discover their talents later in life? Or had we simply created a culture that dismissed the potential of people once they reached a certain age? What advice would you give to other people who think they're too old to start something new? Asked one journalist, a young man who seemed genuinely curious rather than condescending. I'd tell them that the time will pass anyway, I said. Whether you spend the next 5 years learning to paint, or learning to play piano, or learning to speak French, you'll still be 5 years older at the end. The question is whether you'll be 5 years older with new skills and experiences, or just 5 years older. What about people who think they don't have talent? Talent is overrated. Joy is underrated. I'm not the most technically skilled artist in the world, but I love what I do, and that love shows in my work. People respond to authenticity more than perfection. April brought a call from Jessica, now preparing for graduation and her entry into professional social work. Grandma, I've been accepted to graduate school, but I want to run something by you first. What is it, sweetheart? I want to specialize in working with older adults who've experienced financial exploitation. I want to do research, maybe write a book someday, about how family relationships can be rebuilt after boundary setting, about how people can find themselves again after years of being defined by their usefulness to others. That sounds wonderful. I was wondering if you'd be willing to be interviewed as part of my research. Obviously, I'd protect your privacy, but your story is so powerful, and I think it could help a lot of people. Jessica, I'd be honored. May brought the completion of my 24 paintings and the beginning of an experience I'd never imagined possible. The gallery sent a truck to my apartment to collect my work. My paintings, created on my fire escape and at kitchen table, were loaded carefully into padded cases and transported to Soho, where they'd be hung on white walls with professional lighting. Carmen and I celebrated with champagne on my fire escape, toasting the journey from that first tentative brushstroke to this moment of public recognition. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, I admitted. What if no one comes? What if no one likes them? What if this is all a mistake? Eleanor, listen to me. Even if only one person comes to your show and looks at your paintings and feels something beautiful, it will have been worth it. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. She was right. The opening reception in October was packed. The gallery had invited everyone on their mailing list, and word had spread through social media and art blogs about the 81-year-old grandmother having her first solo show. Sarah, Michael, and Jessica came with their partners. Carmen brought her entire extended family. My support group from the senior center attended as a group. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to 3 years earlier showed up to celebrate. But the most meaningful moment came when a stranger, a woman about my daughter's age, stopped me near my painting of the bus. "Are you the artist?" she asked. "I am. This painting? Can you tell me the story behind it?" So I did. I told her about being asked to leave the bus, about refusing to go, about the moment when I decided to stop making myself small for other people's comfort. "I needed to hear that," she said, tears in her eyes. "I've been taking care of my elderly mother, and she's become so demanding, so critical. I thought being a good daughter meant saying yes to everything, but I'm exhausted and resentful, and that's not good for either of us." "Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad daughter," I told her. "It makes you a whole person, and whole people make better family members than resentful ones." She bought the bus painting. My moment of transformation would hang in her home, reminding her daily that refusing to be diminished is a form of self-love. November brought my 81st birthday and a party that felt like a celebration of life itself. 3 years earlier, I'd been a woman who measured her worth by her willingness to sacrifice. Now I was an artist, a friend, a grandmother who was known rather than just needed. "What do you want for your birthday?" Carmen asked as we planned the party. "Everything I already have," I said, "and maybe a few more years to enjoy it." December brought Christmas and the unexpected return of something I thought I'd lost forever. My children's genuine affection. Not the performative love of people who needed my money, but the real warmth of adult children who had learned to appreciate their mother as a complete person. Sarah and James invited me to spend Christmas Eve with them, not to help with cooking or coordination, but just to be present. Michael called on Christmas morning to share news about his life, not to ask for help with a crisis. Jessica sent me a painting she'd created in college, a watercolor of hands holding brushes that she'd titled Grandmother's Gift. Looking around my apartment that evening, decorated with lights Carmen and I had strung together, filled with cards from friends and family who loved me as I was, rather than for what I could provide, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt complete. This story began on a bus, with a moment of humiliation that became a moment of awakening. A 78-year-old woman being asked to leave public transportation became a 78-year-old woman learning to stay in her own life. The woman I was 3 years ago would not recognize the woman I am today. That Eleanor was defined by her relationships to other people, by her ability to solve problems and provide resources. This Eleanor is defined by her own interests, her own growth, her own capacity for joy. The love I lost by setting boundaries was transactional love, conditional on my continued usefulness. The love I found by honoring my own worth is authentic love, based on who I am, rather than what I can provide. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years I spent being everyone else's solution. The truth is more complicated than regret. Those years taught me empathy and resilience. They showed me the depth of my own strength. They gave me children and grandchildren who, despite our struggles, have become people I genuinely enjoy knowing. But I don't regret changing either. I don't regret learning to say no. I don't regret discovering that I am enough, just as I am, without adding value through sacrifice. At 81 years old, I am more myself than I have ever been. I paint because it brings me joy. I play piano because music fills my soul with something words cannot express. I travel because the world is vast and beautiful, and I finally understand that I deserve to see it. I love my children and grandchildren, but I no longer love them at the expense of loving myself. I support my friends, but I no longer support them by depleting my own resources. I am generous with my time and attention and care, but I am also protective of my energy and my peace. The bus driver who told me to get off that March morning probably doesn't remember our encounter. It was likely just another difficult passenger in a long career of managing difficult passengers. But for me, it was the moment when I learned that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to move when someone expects you to disappear. I stayed on that bus, and I found love again. Not romantic love, though Carmen assures me that's still possible at 81. Not the conditional love of family members who needed me to remain diminished, but the deep, sustaining love of friendship chosen freely, the satisfied love of work that matters, the quiet love of a life lived authentically. Most importantly, I found love for Eleanor. The woman who spent decades invisible finally learned to see herself clearly. The woman who measured her worth by her usefulness finally understood her inherent value. The woman who thought her story was ending finally realized she'd just been writing the introduction. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in the woman I used to be, know this. It is never too late to remember who you are. It is never too late to discover what brings you joy. It is never too late to say no to relationships that diminish you and yes to experiences that expand you. The years you think are behind you may actually be ahead of you. The talents you think you missed the chance to develop may be waiting for exactly the right moment to emerge. The life you think you're too old to change may be more malleable than you ever imagined. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you ever realized that you'd been loving people who only valued what you could give them? Have you ever discovered that saying no was actually an act of self-love? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this story touched something in your heart, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these moments of truth, these stories of transformation that remind us all that it is never, ever too late to fall in love with our own lives. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that every person's story of growth and change and defiant joy matters, regardless of the age at which it unfolds. Sometimes the most beautiful destinations are reached by refusing to get off the bus when someone who doesn't understand your journey tells you it's time to go. Sometimes love finds you when you finally stop chasing it and start honoring your own worth instead. Sometimes the best years of your life begin with learning how to stay.